Like lots of people, I started with the wrong thing. It was drawing and pictures which drew me into art, as it does many people, and that's still true today. I don't find it escapist. I think it's almost a sort of visual diary almost of what's on my mind. I was quite a boring schoolboy, mediocre. Not particularly brilliant at anything. I didn't really know who my people were. Then it's only when I met people who were in that world, who were getting into art school and doing those things, and I thought, there you are. I'm not a perfectionist. I went to art school, but my other love was science. With the relationship between arts and science, they're both driven by curiosity.
Why did you decide to teach at all?
Teaching's learning's growing. I had a feeling of this is inevitable. I have to try this. For anyone who would ever want to think it's risky to jump and try new things, well, the alternative might be riskier.
You're called the playful saboteur.
We wanted to show that the studios and the way that they were configured could be completely different. It was us trying to find a way to create a different kind of home in the industry.
How do you define leadership? Welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership. And today's guest is someone who I've seen online. And then a couple of months ago, friend David McQueen had his first conference. And my guest today spoke. And the more he spoke, the more and described what he does in his organization and how they've built it out, I thought, this sounds insane. This is my kind of insane. I like this. This is someone who's taken the way of working and cultures and just kind of blown it up. But like, why not? Let's do something completely different. And I love people who have the audacity to reinvent things rather than do things the same way. Because we know sometimes a lot of systems don't work and people just keep on in that sameness. So I thought, let me reach out to my guest, Nick Eagleton, today, and let's have a wonderful, fascinating conversation just to explore who he is, what he does, how his organization shows up in the world, and just learn more about the man behind all of that creativity. So I have the pleasure of having Nick Eagleton, who is co-founder of Saboteur, who is teacher, designer, creative director, a lover of art, shall I say as well. As I found out as well. But it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
You too. It's wonderful to be here. Very excited to talk to you about that. And what an intro. Thanks very much. You could have kept going. It's wonderful.
About someone that who you do a lot of talks, you do keynotes, and obviously that you teach. When people ask you to either put your bio together or to talk about yourself, how do you like to be introduced?
I, like lots of people, I started with the wrong thing. And I do like to start with the wrong thing. Because loads of people, you don't know how to find your way in life. And some happens by accident and a bit by design. So I went to art school and I was doing sculpture, knowing I didn't want to be an artist, but I loved doing that and learning that stuff and meeting those people. And then I left art school and I was thinking, now what do I do? Because you can't monetize what happens when you go to art school. So I had no way of making a living. I had no job, no work, but I'd loved doing it. And so then I had to have that time in between how did I start with sculpture and then find my way by accident into an industry which I've been in since, through design and then into branding and then communications, which I totally fell in love with, which is by accident and by meeting people. And I think I like to start there because some of the sort of wonky ways that we find our way into the things that we love matter and make us who we are. I wouldn't be the same person and I wouldn't be into the same things if I hadn't have had to find my way through some roundabout route. And the things I learned along the way. So I'd start there with my biog, and thank you for the long list of things. It just means I'm really interested in lots of different things. I think that's true.
You said you were a lover of art. So if I was to go to a 7-year-old Nick, what would I find at that point in time that would give me some indication, if anything, around your love of art and what were you about then?
Well, for a 7-year-old, I don't think they know what art is, but they know what pictures are. So you would have found a 7-year-old Nick drawing some pretty good dinosaurs. And I was beginning to get a handle on the anatomy of dinosaurs, probably other animals as well, and imaginary worlds. And I have to say, so it was drawing and pictures which drew me into art, as it does many people. And that's still true today. I love drawing, and I love drawing as a way of thinking, scribbling as a way of thinking. And when I teach, I do lots of teaching around creative thinking, and people like to think with words, write with words, and I encourage them to think with pictures, and it's so different. It's so funny. Even a terrible little stick figure of someone sitting on a cloud looks and feels different to someone writing someone on a cloud. So that instinct of pictures having a power to unlock imagination is still true. And I still feel my imagination wake up when I scribble and when I draw. So I think there's quite a lot of the 7-year-old Nick is still in the 50-something-year-old Nick. And I can't remember what 50 I am.
When you think about what you described right now, being able to use pictures and tap into your imagination, a lot of times when I've spoken to people who are really into art, those who used to paint when they were younger, they've also always expressed that for them they found it as a form of escapism. And I don't know why, it's always seemed to be a word that kind of resonates with a lot of people. And I'm curious, with you, did you find that exactly the same? Did you find some solace in your imagination and then be able to pour that out into your painting as you kind of gone through years in your teenage years? Or was it just you just loved expressing yourself in that way?
It's going to be the latter. I don't find it escapist because of the nature of the work I do and the way I think. There's lots of, it's almost like a stream of consciousness. A thought leads to another thought. And that's sort of how the creative process is one of being very open to all sorts of odd little things that come in and things you see. You've got to keep your eyes wide open and your mind wide open. And drawing's just a way of getting it down on paper. So I think it's almost a sort of little bit of a sort of visual diary almost of what's on my mind. And it's so funny, I'll be in meetings and I'm in lots of quite serious meetings, meetings about what you would see would be grown up and relatively important things. And I won't always make notes. I'll sometimes make drawings, and the drawings will have no relation at all to what's actually being said in the meeting, but somehow will be some other thing that's on my mind at the time. And I'll look back and think, why did I draw that? And it does matter. It's like a little second stream of thought that's going on. So it's more, for me, drawing as a way of being present, not escapist. I want to sort of be right there with what's going on in my head. And I love drawings because they're fast, really fast. I don't mean beautiful drawings. Scrappy little weird scribbles is enough, but that does it too.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Because when I think back to some of my drawings I had back in the day, I look at them, I was like, ooh, that was awful. Like, I used to shy away from drawing because it just made you feel, it made me feel inadequate. I'm like, I'm trying to draw a stick man and it wasn't working right.
The idiosyncrasies of us as people and life as well. So there were two people in our studio who are very thin and tall. And they were talking about it's quite difficult to buy trousers if you're very thin and very tall. So they both had this shared thing where they could only get their very tall, thin trousers certain places. And so I felt it imperative that I drew a pair of really tall, thin trousers so that I could capture this moment. And then now when I look back at the tall, thin trousers, it makes me laugh because it makes me remember that conversation about, wow, I wonder what it would be like to have to buy really tall, thin trousers. It's like that. It's a sort of memory of how brilliantly different we all are. And I've never really struggled with having to get really tall, thin trousers. But so those little things, they form a sort of, but it's like hoover all those things up and they appear in things that I do. They appear in the teaching I do because I love the surprises that life gives us.
So with that in mind then, and you're already tapping into your creative self from a very young age, you said it right at the start that you went into art, even though you never really had any real desires to make it a career. Why did you do it?
Why did I do it? I I'd found my crowd. I'd found my tribe. I was quite a boring schoolboy. Mediocre. Not particularly brilliant at anything. And I didn't really know who my people were. I hadn't found my true friends, and it was fine. Then it's only when I met people who were in that world, who were getting into art school and doing those things, and I thought, there you are. These weird people who were into all these funny things and looked different and weird. And I thought, you're my people. And so I discovered a group who I felt I identified with. And although I didn't want to be an artist, I did want to be with those people. And I have always wanted to be with those people. And I'm married to a person like that. And my greatest and oldest friend is really one of those people, a very eccentric, brilliant printmaker in Norwich who's never compromised on his life, but he's wonderful. And so I've wanted to always be around that. So I think that it was a culture that I could be part of.
That sense of wanting to be part of a community, a tribe, it's such a powerful pull that can lead us down paths that we don't even think about, even imagine, but at the same time doesn't really matter as long as we know that we are in a place that we feel like we actually belong, where people can see us and we can see them and we recognize each other. It's such a powerful space of it to be in and operate in.
The other thing that drew me, I didn't want to go to study anything particularly academic, where I was processed through a series of stages and had to fulfill certain learning steps. At art school, and certainly then, you would go to art school and you would effectively have a whole load of time, and then you just got to go and find things you're interested in and make things. And so it was a complete sense of self-discovery. There wasn't that many prompts. You had to think, what have I seen? What am I interested in? What will I make? How will I interpret that? So the self-reliance it teaches you is just amazing, because you have to look really hard and be into lots of different things, learn how to translate that into something which might have some form of expression. And I was into photography and printmaking and making objects and doing performances. It didn't really matter what. That experience of thinking, there's the world, it's big and interesting, go and look at it, find things that intrigue you and share them in some way. What an education that was. It couldn't have been a more enriching and sometimes terrifying and always inspiring education. And there's very few moments in life where you're just given the time and space to go and look and experience and interpret what you will without any sense of being directed in one way or the other. So you find the things which are often unusual things that you really, really capture your imagination. And then you have to follow those things. And it's quite rare. It doesn't happen so much in my daily life now because things are busy and I have a business and everything. But still, what a way to start that was.
In that period of time, what did you discover in your self-discovery, self-reflection, exploration piece that you didn't know before?
I discovered something quite early on, which for me has been profound and has shaped some of the... I've not done lots of brave things, only maybe a few, but it's helped shape that, which is when you're young, you think there are all these rules about how things have to be done. And you're given lots of instructions and you have to fulfill those instructions and do things right in order to move forwards. And succeed is the wrong word when you're young, but there's a way of doing things and it's a set path. And then I realized through my experience of going to art school and the people I met there, that's all just a kind of fiction. All that people want you to do is something interesting. They give you prompts as a way of getting you started, but you can throw all that away so long as you do something interesting, something else. And so I learned that the rules that surround us around what constitutes a good piece of art, or what a workplace culture should be like, or how a house should look, are sort of fictions in a way, and that you can make it your own, and that's okay. People don't tell you this, and definitely not at school. You know, that's very not school way of doing it. But to learn that early on was to say, wow, they're all just a bit of a fiction, but you do have to make something else in its place. You still have to put the work in to imagine new things, but that you can, and people will embrace those.
It sounds very much, there's a freeness and a freedom that comes from that way of thinking. And then when I then throw that up against what I'm going to call the normal societal way of thinking, they sound like two opposites. It's very much like, in a sense, I'm going to use the paraphrase of being plugged into the matrix and being outside of the matrix. That's kind of what I can get that feeling, that sense. So how do you, with that enlightenment and that enlightened way of thinking, how did you navigate like working in like organizations and cultures that you did for like 20 plus years when you were like in the partners and all those different roles that you had previously?
That is exactly why I love work so much in working with other organizations, is because it's one foot in freedom, if you like, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and one foot in all the constraints and realities. That's my happy place, because I never wanted to be an artist because I never wanted to be completely unhinged from some other reality or some other framework. I needed the tension, and I didn't see it as opposites. I see them as the two things which, when you put them together, make it possible to make things and progress and do new things. That's exactly what I need, is having to balance the tension of there are constraints around what you can make, deliverables, timelines, budgets, teams, politics, all the things you have, which we have to embrace in any organization in order to do anything. And then finding the space for the freedom of thought. Those two things together, that's life. That's life. It's not a fantasy. And I love that tension. And it's not always easy. And sometimes there's lots and lots of hard work needed to navigate awkward politics between agencies and clients and within all those things that happen all the time. Sometimes it's like that, and sometimes it's very free thinking and everything in between. I need them both to stay tethered.
So you know what, I can see that. I can rather than seeing them as opposites, to your point, it's very much a paradox. It's a polarity where you need both. That's the tension. The tension is, and I guess what makes it difficult sometimes is with an polarity is you can overuse one and unuse another one, and then it can become a negative thing. So being able to know how to hold that tension into place in the right possible way, I guess it's the journey. And it sounds like it's something you spend years figuring out how to do that. So I'm curious to learn how to be able to implement that a lot better in my life.
And this is probably a factor, is I'm not a perfectionist. Many people in my industry, in the creative industries, whether it's in design or branding or advertising, it could be anything, a writer, because I'm not I should be, but because I'm not a perfectionist, it means I'm not a purist one way or the other, like extremely practical and pragmatic, or extremely unbridled creative expression at the expense of everything else, because I don't sit at those, and I'm happy to find places in between that by their very nature are usually imperfect, because they're a mix of things and they're not totally single-minded always. I like being there, and that helps. If I was really, really perfectionist about everything, then I'd be much more frustrated and would have had many more challenges, I'm sure. I may have made some more incredible things in my life, but that wouldn't have made me any happier. And I like the mind game between the rational and the intuitive. I've always liked that. That I went to art school, but my other love was science, which is not uncommon. The relationship between arts and science, they're both driven by curiosity. That's the thing underneath everything, which is, I hope I can get to old age and still be curious. Why is that the way it is? That curiosity of asking why, that's a big driver, and that's common to arts and science. They're expressed in different ways, but I love that, being a bit rational and being a bit intuitive. Those two things sort of match and work. Learning and research for a project, understanding it, and then allowing time for the imagination to run free. They're different stages, but they're different feelings, but they're both wonderful. They both matter. I suppose I try to remember to do both. Try to remember to listen and learn and look and study and be analytical, and then try to remember to actually let go and actually imagine and allow imagination to run a bit free. With experience and with time, I've been able to slightly better organize that slightly chaotic process. I suppose that's a bit what experience helps with. Experience is managing that. I can parcel things up a little more so that there's time made for those.
As you're looking at that and exploring that and creating a time for that, there's a sense of the question that comes in my head that goes, so as you're doing that, are you doing this intentionally or subconsciously? And are you also a naturally ambitious person? Because when you're people like, I'm a high performer, I'm a naturally ambitious person, therefore there's a intentionality that I have in the way that I approach things. And it sounds very much like you're not doing it in that way. So I'm curious, is my assumption right? Or you're a naturally ambitious person, however you just held it very, very differently in a very unique and authentic kind of way?
Well, you'd probably have to get a psychologist to answer that question on my behalf, because I might answer it wrong. Because I don't know how well I know myself. I think that the answer to am I ambitious is, of course. It depends for what. I don't think I'm ambitious to be some great person who's recognized for great acts and a name who I don't have ambitions for that. But I do have ambitions for the work I do. I do have ambitions for the contribution that might make. I really do, and I care deeply about those things. I'd like to think I care deeply and have big ambitions that my time and with other fabulous people that I work with could be used well and to make good things. So I'm ambitious about that. And then that does translate into a necessity to organize my thoughts and thoughts of those around me and listen to their skills in order to make the very best use of that time. So it is very intentional, because the ambition is not about, I have ambition to be famous. I definitely don't. And may I not be famous. I have ambition for the things that I might spend my time doing, whether it's, if I'm approaching doing some teaching, every time I do a day's teaching, for example, I have a very, very strong and real ambition that day is a good day and people are inspired by that. I really do. I take it and I get nervous every time. Of course I do. Which means I will try to organize my time and organize the day and organize my thoughts so that it might be a really good day. And I think that's really intentional. Sometimes in that day, there'll be laughter and fun and games and seriousness and all of the things which happen spontaneously, but it is intentional. It's not freeform. It's not jazz. It's a bit more classical than jazz.
Why did you decide to teach at all?
For anyone who's not done teaching, there's this revelation which is discovered by everyone who starts teaching, is teaching's learning, learning's growing. People don't say this. Like lots of things, it happened by accident. One evening I stood in for someone. I was working in the industry and I'd done lots of things and I'd never shared anything I thought I'd learned. And like many people, you'd go into that thinking, who am I to say to others how things should be? Who am I to teach? What have I got to teach? I don't know anything myself. It's chaos in here. But I did one evening where I was stood in for someone much more experienced than myself and found I, by some miracle, had some perspective to share. And it was with people who were less experienced than me, and they were very hungry to hear some perspective on, and it was some aspect of the creative industries. And I thought, wow, because by sharing something, I had to think about my own lived experience and what I'd learned. And it suddenly woke up a thing, well, I maybe have something to share, and that's valuable and inspiring. And every time I've ever been with a group of people, I always leave with more energy than when I started. I'm tireder, but I've got more. It's amazing. The equation is quite incredible with those things. So I discovered quick that I liked it because I felt that it helped me understand what I did. So with the creative thinking teaching I do, for example, I've really had to think really hard about how I think, how others think. How do you shape thoughts? What's the process like? What are the challenges and pitfalls? What gets in the way? What's the psychology of that? And build learnings around that, which are shareable and fun, and you could use them on any day of the week. You don't have to go and have a special retreat and do some creative time. You can do it on a Wednesday. And that's taught me so much about what I do and the work I do. And you know, the thing about being 7 and drawing, teaching keeps me feeling like this crazy job I do is still like the first time I did it. It keeps it feeling new. And that's, you know, that I wouldn't have discovered that otherwise.
Because the closest I've come to teaching has been when I facilitate sessions, and you have that back and forth with those that you're working with, the leaders in the room, or even when you do like fireside chats or Q&A sessions. And I always say I enjoy them because there's a lot of stuff that we know accumulated over the years of working and living that we forget and we take for granted. And when you're in those scenarios, it forces you to pull on those different things. So you don't even know what someone might ask you or what they're going to need. And you're like, oh my gosh, I do know that. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Why do people want to know that? That's so basic. I used to say that all the time. Like, that's I want to give you the higher grade stuff. But you're like, no, I want the lower grade stuff that you think,
Yeah.
because it's for you, it's easy because you know it. But to other people, they don't. So it's such a great way of being able to reconnect and, in a sense, humble yourself.
Yes. Yes.
as well, which is really, really powerful.
I totally agree. So that facilitation and teaching, it's very similar dynamic, right? So you're faced with lots of situations that happen live, and you think, oh God, how would I address this or think about this? What advice might I give? And you realize how much you don't know, as well as the things you do know. So it keeps you on your toes. There's a wonderful quote. There's a guy called George Wallace who wrote a book called The Art of Thought. And in it, and I've always thought about this quote, he said, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? You have to find the words to explain how you think, to know how you think. So the reason why those things are so good, you know, with you facilitating or with your sharing stuff or when you're teaching or it means you have to find the words to describe what's going on. And therefore you learn, wow, what's in my head? Now I realize a bit more about the good and the bad of how I think or how others think. It's good, isn't it? And I think it's a bit like that. And if you don't ever do any of those things, you don't really discover, because you don't have to, because you can move from one project or one situation to another without always reflecting on what was at work in those things.
So true. That's so true. And speaking of, I guess, having the courage and the boldness to be able to step into uncomfortable situations like that, like teaching people, for example, you were in a role for roughly about 19, 20 plus years, and then you took on another one for about a year or so. So I'm going to just kind of sum it up. For about 20 years, you worked for organizations, and then you decided to leave and start your own thing and co-founded the Saboteur. When you made that move, what was that like for you? Because there is a safety, in a sense, of belonging to a big, large organization that you lose when you begin to do your own thing. So I'm always curious to learn, like, what was that transition like for people who've worked in spaces for a very long time and then they step out?
The safety thing, it depends on what you would mean by leaving what would have been safe. That experience, which was the very making of my career and the people I met, amazing people, amazing projects. It was a really extraordinary experience and life-changing experience, had run its course. So there were two things. I wasn't quite 20 years in a big network, and I wasn't quite 50. And those two things coincided, and I got the panic that I could settle into some role and find myself 60 and not happy and not useful, and some useless old whatever who'd lost his edge and was out of touch. And I knew I would be a miserable, sour, old 60-year-old person. And that moment was the moment to leap. And so I knew that the road had run out in that way of working. I didn't like that environment anymore. I didn't like the size of the organization. I didn't like the bureaucracy. I loved the people and talent. And it was quite apparent that there were many other new ways of working, and they were already beginning to emerge in the world of work, but not where I worked. And in lots of big organizations, it's hard to do that. So the road had run out, and so I had to change. And so the feeling of safety was lay in what lay next. It didn't lie in where I was. I couldn't have stayed because I would have been not easy to live with. So when I jumped, I was jumping with some really amazing people. I could never have done it on my own. I'd met along that way, I'd met some really many extraordinary people, but a couple in particular who are good at things I'm not good at. We had a common belief on the important things in a sense of humanity and our desire to do things differently and independence and the important thing, the foundational things, but our skills were different. So I didn't take a risk in the sense of I had to do it all on my own. I could try to do the things I did more or less well in a new context. So for me, it was the only way. And people did say that, the thing that it says at the time is, what's the worst that can happen whenever, and particularly with a new venture, setting up a new business, is what's the worst going to happen? The worst going to happen is some ill befalls your family, or you lose the house or something like that. They're the big, everything else is details. With the business, if we could make it a success, amazing. If it wasn't a success, we'd learn. So I didn't feel a sense of dread that professionally it would all fall apart. I had a feeling of, this is inevitable. I have to try this. And I did learn something important about that feeling of if it didn't work, I could live with that. We all could have. It happens, it happens all the time. People try things that don't work, but I could really live with that and think, you know what? No one could ever say I didn't try. And I'd find another way to make my living, and I'd, pick it back up somehow or other. The alternative, where I was really scared, was not changing. That got the fear in me. So I had to go. So it was easy. And when I did finally actually make the leap, like the letter, I'm going, it was easy. It was easy. And it's been, for anyone who would ever want to think it's risky to jump and try new things, is, well, the alternative might be riskier. And you never know, it might work. And that's been absolutely the most satisfying professional and personal experience of my whole life, is trying. It's been wonderful, and we've made a success of it as far as we can. It's also been the joy of striving in a new way. What fun that's been.
Have you then managed to satisfy the two questions that you tend to ask your clients, which was, would you want to be free from, and would you want to be free to do or be?
Yeah, yes. More than anything I think I've ever done. Yes. Yeah. Although, great question. I've never actually asked myself around the big change I made in the way of working, of those two questions. But you can see some of those things that I wanted to be free from. I definitely wanted to be free from the way that big organizations can create such a lot of structure that it can appear to be wasting of time. I mean, they're inevitable in some ways, but they lose sight of the most important thing, which is people and talent and ideas. That's the most important thing. And many things got in that way. And I have been free from that. And the free too is, you saw this when we met at David's brilliant event. We don't have job titles. And so my job title used to be creative something, creative director, creative partner. And I never wanted to be called those things because they were like, who am I to be the one who directs the creative or has the ideas? We do. A group does, bring people together. So I did want to be free from that. And that's been brilliant, actually. And some of those, I think, outdated constraints in lots of creative organizations, loud, noisy people, I'm one of them, gets a disproportionately large amount of airtime. I don't think that's right. We strive to listen to quieter voices. It's hard to do that in some organizational setups where it's much freer and you can be more independent. That can happen. And magic can happen as well with that.
Touching on that point around the different titles that you have, can you kind of just delve a bit more into that? You're called the playful saboteur. So even like, why saboteur? Like even when you hear that in the first place, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Why that? So like, why that particular title for the name of the company, and then obviously different how you've gone about changing the names and having playful, yours is playful, but having other names in your organization.
Saboteur came about because we was looking for a simple, memorable name, which would say that the industry needed some new ways of working. And we didn't want to throw bricks at industries and be revolutionaries on every project. We wanted to show that the studios and the way that they were configured could be completely different. That was our saboteur, is how we worked and how we made the work and how we worked together and the rules around our organization. That was different, genuinely different. And we were inspired by other brave people who'd done that. That was the saboteur. It was us trying to find a way to create a different kind of home in the industry. And particularly, it's true of other industries, but in the creative industries, that feeling of where you can find a home that's sort of U-shaped in an industry, because it's demanding creatively and psychologically. You have to give a lot to those industries, whether you're a writer or a designer, a producer, whatever it might be, that you could find a new kind of way of making home where great work could be made. And that was the saboteur. And so that it didn't come across as overly aggressive, which none of us are. We're ever so lovely and kind and friendly and laugh a lot, and no one's mean. Everyone adds another word, and so I've got some cards here. It's going to show. So we all have a business card and a name which just has one extra word in. So that's the hopeful saboteur, which is a wonderful mark, and the ambidextrous saboteur and the spirited saboteur. So everyone has a word which talks about something that drives them in their work and by extension in their personality. And so you get a feel for people involved in the work. And so it's probably more important that I'm called the playful saboteur, which is something I try and bring to the process and to the work and to the ideas. It's probably more useful to have that title than if I was called creative director, which is like, well, what's that? It's like having a department. And it's one of those experiments. It could have been ridiculous and people said, can you just tell us what your job titles are, please? But people don't ask that. We explain what role we'll play in a given project, but people like that that personality come through, because you'll know this, people buy people. If you're trying to find someone to take on a project, it's people who are going to do the project. You want to be able to know them and trust them, get to like them ideally, and that they'll bring everything to it. And the names help us do that. And it's been great fun. Sometimes people say, aren't you going to run out of adjectives? And I'm like, well, there are probably tens of thousands of adjectives, so we'd have to be pretty big before that became an issue.
Has it also served as a way of being able to identify who your people are and who your tribe is for people coming into that kind of environment, as opposed to those who are looking for particular titles?
That is a very, very perceptive point. Yes, that's one of its biggest roles, is the kind of environment where you don't have a hierarchical job title, and therefore so those titles come with a degree of prestige or a sense of career progression. You don't have that, and the studio is structured in a way that there's a lot of autonomy for the people on those different project groups. If you wanted to have lots of power, for want of another word, it's not an environment which would suit that. If you want prestige and status, it's not going to suit that. So those characteristics of this organization are self-selecting, which means that people who want to join that group want that autonomy and are driven by some other things other than maybe there's a prestige, or there's a desire to lead, overtly lead. It does do that, and it's one of its great powers. But on the other hand, for people who do, but if you can imagine people who wouldn't normally get a very big voice in an organization, that could be quiet people, shy people, if you like support roles, they could be seen as being support roles traditionally, don't get that much of a voice. With that approach in our studio, they more often do. So that the counterpoint is that there's a broader sense of who will be able to have a point of view and shape the way that the work goes. Ideally, some days it's perfect and some days it's imperfect, as with everything else, but it does help with that. There is that slightly agonizing moment when a new person joins, is like, what's the word? And they come up with words, and it's like there's a whole tussle around it, but it's fun though. It's fun to do. My favorite one, I have to say, and I was very, very annoyed because it's so good, our CFO, equivalent CFO, Natalie, who I've known for a long, long time. She manages all of the business side of it, all the sort of finance side of it. She's the unlikely saboteur, which is it's a really good one. So
Ooh, I like that.
we have lots of times when, if we meet new teams, client teams, they'll start debating what their saboteur name would be. It's a great icebreaker. It's always been a great icebreaker.
It really is.
So what? Go on.
It's such a.
What might be your word?
I think mine will probably be mischievous or mystery saboteur.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think that's probably what it would be.
That is fantastic. Can you see? So you'd go into a situation where you have a little team and you'd meet someone new and they think, wow, it has the promise of something interesting to come, more than just if you had a title. It says there's something, because I think lots of meetings and lots of life is quite dull. It's another day at work, or it's, and these bits of our personality, which we're good at them as kids, and then we can sometimes forget them, matter and make life interesting when you're older. Your mischievousness, matters. It's like interesting. It makes life more interesting, and probably the things you do more interesting in your interactions. It has that quality. So it's like a little reminder for me with my orange playful saboteur card, which I seem to have given away actually, is don't forget, stay playful. Don't get boring. Don't get slow. Don't get corporate. Stay playful. Hence drawing the long thin trousers.
It's interesting. I'm about to do a piece of work with a bunch of CEOs at a major creative industry tomorrow, actually. And one of the things that we're exploring is around the founder's mentality, um, using the report from like Bain, Bain and Company they wrote a while ago. And one of the things that they talk about is as companies get bigger, they lose some of the things that have made them great, like that founder's mentality, the insurgent mission, and they get bogged down in complexity. Whereas when it comes to creative industries, you're supposed to be free flowing, you're supposed to be open, you're supposed to be curious, experimental, but you can lose so much of that when you become a company,
Yeah.
rather than losing the ethos of what actually created you in the first place. And it's like you very much want to hold on to the essence of what it does really mean to be curious, creative, playful, and not just to your clients, but that's what the company's about, and then you pour out into the world with the clients that you work with.
Yeah, you can create a lot of processes which then become their own culture. Any process that you might have or structural thing you'd have, of which we have lots, of course we have lots of things to run the business, should be in the service of what the business is there to do. So in our case, the mission of the studio is to set brands free. We have lots of conversations, problem solving conversations about how to make sure that, we had a wonderful little, after our daily meeting, we had a wonderful little, a little session from our project management craft, we call them. There's 6 of them. They're wonderful, the best I've ever worked with. They make it all happen. These are the unsung heroes of our industry. They tend to sort of be the ones who aren't seen as being the drivers of the work, but they make everything happen. But they're very involved in all our projects in a way that I haven't experienced in past life because of the way we're set up. They have a lot to say about the work. They do amazing relationship building with clients. Their whole thing about what we're here to do was all about, well, as a studio, we're here to set brands free. Our role is to do all of these things that enable all of us and all of the people in the studio to do that, to maintain that spirit of what it will take to set brands free, of to understand our clients and to keep things on track and keep your promises, all those sorts of things. So that ethos is so important, and it applies differently to different parts of different roles and things. But yeah, processes and structure can just become their own culture, and then it's like, oh, that's bad.
So does that mean that you don't ever, or that conversation around promotion, pay rises, different things like that, because you say you do have structures in place, how do you navigate that in a space where you don't have the titles?
So and this is something we've learned on the way. We sort of find that as we've grown, problems arise. What I think we've tried to do, and generally been quite good at, is like address the problems when they come up, not let them hang around to become bigger problems. The most common challenge we had from a team perspective was we like having these interesting job titles, and we don't want to be pinned down to a particular role and a particular level, but how do I progress my career? And so in that sense, people need some sense of benchmarking, especially versus their peers. The people we have in the studio have friends and peers who work in similar organizations and work in the industry, and they need some benchmark of how they can then see, well, where am I? At what point can I negotiate for a different salary or more responsibility, and because it was very fluid before, it was a real challenge. So what we've done, and we asked our team, we had an away day last year, and we said, here are the 3 scenarios. You could keep it as it is. You could keep the job titles we have them where we don't have formal job titles. We'll build a structure or build some benchmarking behind the scenes. Or we can have normal job titles. We can go back to what the industry would normally do. Nobody wanted that. So we've done that middle way, which people stay as being called the curious saboteur or the hungry saboteur or the ambidextrous saboteur. Behind the scenes, there's some smart thinking gone into, these are the bands which exist in the industry. And these are very normal bandings of like 5 bands of where you might sit in terms of experience and seniority. And people are aware of where they sit in that, so that when it comes to those points where they feel they should be in a different band, more experience, more responsibility, more money, then that helps that conversation, because there's some industry benchmarking around those things. And it's made a big difference, So we have both.
I guess it's that state of continuous learning.
Yes.
Though.
Yeah.
And it's the ability to listen to your team and course correct, or like, what is it you want to do? How do you want to approach this? And then make a decision and kind of move forward, which is in a sense, that's one of the beauties of having a smaller, nimbler organization, to be able to do that, as opposed to trying to turn a giant ship around.
Yeah. And we don't have overlords that we are accountable for, predominantly for on the money side of things, because we're able to manage the studio as we think is best for us and for the future and for our work and clients. It leads to different decisions, it does. It's not a decision, for example, all about money and this and that much profit and that much whatever. It's a more rounded discussion around the value that we bring to the people we work with and as a community of people in the studio. And they do feel really different. But as you say, we have to be constantly problem solving. Things come up. We had a really interesting discussion as a group yesterday about ways of working. There are ways that we could be more efficient. The process, the creative process, whether it's a very strategic project or whether it's a very visual project, that creative process is a bit windy, messy. We know it's going to be messy. How could you make that as smooth as you can without it not having its wonderful, messy moments? And that is possible. And so we do think about those things. And again, it's that rational and intuitive. Leave room for imagination, but be smart about how time is used and how we communicate. So that, because the worst thing, I guess with all of us, but particularly when you're doing ideas for a living, is you don't want to waste time, because there's not enough time. When you're just doing completely the wrong thing, it's frustrating. So you want to be set off on the right path, and then it's messy and ideas are hard, but you're in the right kind of territory. And that helps, and that requires constant thinking about communication and best uses of time, the combination of people and how they combine their skills, who to bring in when. And I like that we do that. I like the there's a sense of balancing the tidiness and the messiness. It goes back to the polls we talked about earlier that make the job interesting, fascinating, actually, for me. They have different roles to play.
Have you ever thought about the fact that when I think back to your younger self, finding your tribe, going down the art school route, it sounds like you've built yourself a new kind of tribe around you in the company that you've co-founded.
Yeah, it's I and everyone in the studio would know I feel this way. I do pinch myself and think, how did this happen? And it's not that it happened by magic, and there was intention, not so much not in me alone, but in us as a group, with me and my fabulous co-founders and the early team. It was intentional that it took on characteristics which had a distinct form and principles and a feeling to it. And it's like when you look back over your shoulder in life, when you've gone on a journey and you push, and it's not without its challenges, of course, nothing is. When you look back over your shoulder and you think, wow, that happened. And I do pinch myself. And I feel you're the same as well. You value gratitude, of what's important and what matters. And the reason why I don't have ambitions to be famous or great or some luminary is because you can lose sight of the things you must be grateful for, which is these people I work with in the here and now, today. They may be the best group of people I ever work with. And today was the day I worked with them, I think that's a miracle, and I value those things. And so it's partly why I like to try and stay in that here and now, is that those things matter. And so, yes, I do feel that through luck and intention, and I suppose for all of us in the studio, a spirit of generosity in saying yes to things and being open to opportunity, it has become a thing.
That authenticity and that intentionality, I think for me, definitely shines through in your navigation process, because it's recognizing what's important to you as an individual, and then finding like-minded people who think the same, and then being able to build a space for other people to come in and step into that, and then working with clients leading from that baseline. Yeah, I can summarize that in less than 20 seconds, but the build up to do that is a lot. It's a lifetime process of what you've kind of shared some of those bits today, of constantly just assessing and reassessing and asking questions and provoking and pushing and prodding and navigating, and being able to see, well, if you do all of that, this can be what you create, which looks very, very different to the rest of the world, but it also makes sense, and it's also needed, and it's also radical. Yet in all of that, it is still joyful, it's still fun, it's still happy, and you can be grateful for that. And that paradox is it's a great space to play in.
I could not have put it better myself. It's a beautiful description, and it does feel like that. Yes. One of the great joys, and it's always been the same for me, working with talented young people especially. I work with lots of talented people, not only young, but as you say, making a space for people to grow into, that's a source of enormous pride and joy and delight for me. It's a sense of real transformation. And that's a big part of what keeps me in love with the work, is seeing that happen. Totally agree. But do you know what? I think I've always loved, and I discovered it through my art education, but I didn't know what it was at the time, the power of an idea, and I mean, in the broadest sense, people will follow an idea probably more than they'll follow a person. They'll follow an idea. It could be an ideology, or it could be a belief, but an idea. So for us building something new, and I've had this experience in my working life before, where there was a strong sense of what brought a group together, is making a place where we had a strong belief up front. We're going to make a studio, and that studio is going to try and set brands free. And so we need to be free. That's an idea which people got. It's quite easy to understand. It's not so easy to do. That's an idea people can follow. So it's not that they will come into that and then grow into that role because of the people there, although the people are very nice, is that they can follow that idea. And I think that's something which it's always been powerful, the power of an idea to spark something in your imagination. I think it's like a magic trick in the very best possible sense. The ideas are like something from nothing in your mind. That's magic for me. Imagine we're on a submarine, in your mind, you're like, whoa, it's like, wow, it's a magic trick that we can imagine things. And I think where bigger ideas about organizations and where things can go, people follow those. So you've got to have an idea for it. And then people can think, wow, that sounds good. The people are simply carriers of that flame, really. And that can be passed on to others as well. That's what's great about them.
I think you might have already answered this, but I'm going to ask you that question anyway, based on what you said. How do you define leadership?
I'll try and answer it in a practical sense. The times when I'm a reluctant leader, just to say it. Like, I don't find it comfortable thinking I'm a leader, although the role requires leadership in many different circumstances. But the times when I feel that I have some useful leadership is in making sure, because there's lots of talent that goes into these projects and in these companies too, is never forgetting where we started in a project, for example, never forgetting what we were asked to do by the people who asked us to do it, being able to rewind when needed, even when it's all moving 100 miles an hour, being able to step back and see the bigger picture. And if you're not down in all the details day to day, you can step back and think, hang on a minute, I think we might have gone the wrong way because of this, or because we've forgotten this. To zoom out is powerful. And typically it helps to have that can feel like leadership, is to say, hang on a minute, we've got to zoom out and we've missed this thing, and we can then reset around it. I found I've done some leading when we have to make right things we've done wrong. You can feel it requires a bit of courage and experience to, one, own up to when you've done it wrong fast and without reservation, and then immediately set in place steps to make it right. I've done a lot of that. I'm really good at eating humble pie, like really good. And I feel that those are times when the team around me and us need someone to be good at that. They want someone who can go and they call the client and they can say, we messed up. We take that, we're on it, and here's what we're going to do next. That's quite a sort of it requires a bit of courage to do that. And I suppose in those moments of either direction setting or staying on track, so that's one side of it, which is, if you like, a practical side, that the team need those things. And then the other side of leadership is constantly trying to bring something into the process by way of moments of inspiration. I'm not saying they're always inspiring, but that's also true. I look at lots of things and see lots of things and watch lots of things. So part of my obligation is to make sure that that's part of what we do. All of us do that, but that's also, and I think that's a little bit leading by example, is open your eyes, see these things and share these things. I think it's a little bit, it's wrong to say, it's like my experience of parenthood is of course you can't make your children do what you want them to do, but you can to try to set an example, and they can sometimes surprise you with just how much they've listened without you realizing they've listened. Yep. You find the same thing. You think, wow, something went in. And it feels a little bit the same as, I think sometimes people who've got a bit more experience and have done more things, and sometimes have that role where they're more responsible for shaping the direction and the progress of a project or something, perhaps find they've got more of an influence over perhaps than they might think, without necessarily always being very directive about things. So I think that those are the things. There's on the one side inspiration, on the other side there's the sort of a bit practical side of experience can count in the strange human dynamic of this world that we live in, of people and problems and mishaps and confusions.
So you start off with, you are a reluctant leader. I was like, okay, this is going to be good. Because reluctant leaders are always the one that have such both a philosophical and practical approach when it comes to leadership, which always lean into connecting, bravery, courage, listening. And you kind of summarized a number of the different points in that, because I guess the best summary I've basically is you see the human and you move and you operate like you're dealing with human beings, not dealing with robots or numbers and all of that kind of stuff. and which is a lot harder to do. Very much like parenting is, it's a lot harder to do, but you lean into that. And for me, that's such a needed way of operating, especially in this day and age, where people really want to connect with someone. So thank you for sharing that. So it's a really powerful description of leadership. I like it.
I love that. I hope that's at the heart of it, and I would love that to be true. I had a lovely conversation. One of the brilliant organizations who I teach with, DNAD, who are really legendary in our industry, do a lot of education stuff, and I do lots of teaching with them. And I said, what is it about that they like the way I teach, I think? And I said, why? And they said, you are able in your training and in your workshops to make it not about you. Although I talk about my experience and experiences a lot, and I talk a lot by way of illustration, and I took that as a huge compliment. I would love to think that, and perhaps that also relates to that, a bit reluctant leader is, I'm uncomfortable. I think I'm uncomfortable it all being about me. I like the us, not the me, and would like it to be about things outside. I don't try not to let my emotions too much come into, and I've had that. We've all had those leaders, who their emotions dictate how they are that day. I'm over that. I don't think that should be in the workplace. I don't think that's a way to work, to belittle younger, lesser people. I don't think that should be in a workplace. And those types of behaviors are about the person, about the leader, not about the others around them. I don't think that should be in work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's even there's a bigger pushback these days, especially with the next generation coming up, of just not putting up with those examples of leadership, which I'm sure you can spend hours on end sharing the war stories.
Yeah, bit too much about that.
Of what some of those experiences were like.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. But we do give thought to this as well, is there's a group of really, really lovely and warm and friendly people, but that doesn't mean that we don't have high standards for the work. And so you can be really hard on work, honest, frank about work, but you can't be like that with people. You can't. We're too fragile, all of us. It's too delicate a process, and particularly when you're doing something where you have to give quite a lot of yourself, as many different jobs do. You can't be so hard on people like that, because we just don't have the resilience for it.
Nick, it has been an absolute pleasure. I have loved the different spaces and places we have been able to explore in this conversation, and we just briefly unpacked your journey, but more importantly around what and why you're building and why it's needed in the world. And I'm sure it's definitely encouraged me, and I'm sure it's going to encourage a lot of people just to even think about that for what they're trying to create, what they're trying to build, even how they're showing up, even in those who are in corporate world, that it is possible to be able to step into something different and do something different while you're still in the confinement of an environment that might feel like it, because like you said, you had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and you were able to kind of play that game before you've completely stepped out. So a lot of lessons, a lot of learnings. Thank you. I really, really appreciate this conversation, and
an absolute joy. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to talk to you about it, and it's been lovely. And that to reflect on these things is to realize how important and precious they are to me. And what I would say is stay mischievous. Don't ever forget that.
Yeah, that's not going to change.
Gotta be a bit naughty.
All the information about Nick and his amazing organization will be available in the show notes. We'll see you next week in Everyday Leadership.